I never thought I would hear my own parents look me in the eye and declare that my children were unwelcome in their home. Yet, there I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone in shock. Thanksgiving was only a few weeks away, and my mom's tone was surprisingly cheerful as she said, "Honey, we need to discuss Thanksgiving this year." For a moment, my heart lifted. Despite the years of tension between us, I still cherished our family traditions. My kids, Mia and Ethan, adored their grandparents, even with the distance that had grown between us. "Of course, Mom. What's the plan?" I replied, already envisioning the familiar sense of roasted turkey and cinnamon filling their home, along with the warmth of a family gathering. There was a brief silence, just long enough to send a shiver down my spine. "Well," Mom said, clearing her throat, "this year we're going to do things a bit differently. It'll be a smaller dinner, just for adults, something more intimate." I frowned. "Oh, so no kids at all?" Another pause, then more tentatively, "Well, not exactly." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Mom sighed, as if she were the one in an awkward situation. "Julia, we love your kids, we truly do. But they can be a bit, energetic. Honestly, we think it would be better if you left them with a sitter this year." I gripped the edge of the counter tightly. "So just my kids? What about Ryan's?" Ryan, my older brother, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, even when he did. Mom hesitated, and that's when I understood. "Ryan and Claire are bringing their boys," she confessed. "But you know how well-behaved they are, Julia. They're just quieter, more refined. It's easier to have them at the table." A wave of heat surged through me. I felt as if I had been slapped, as if the ground had suddenly vanished beneath my feet. "They're just kids," I said, my voice strained. "Mia is 7 and Ethan is 4. Sure, they have energy, but they're sweet and they love you. We're just trying to have a peaceful evening," Mom replied, her tone sharp, now annoyed that I wasn't simply accepting this. "It's not personal, Julia. Not personal." I clenched my jaw, holding back the biting words that threatened to escape. This wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It was about how they had consistently treated my children as an afterthought while elevating Ryan's boys. They attended every one of their school plays but never made it to Mia's dance recital. Christmas gifts were always a bit more generous for Ryan's kids. And now, they weren't even trying to conceal it. "I can't believe this," I murmured. "You're really saying my kids aren't welcome, but Ryan's are?" "Oh, Julia, don't be so dramatic," Mom sighed. "It's just one dinner. You and Mark are still invited, of course." I almost laughed at the ridiculousness of it all. They wanted me there, but not the two people I cherished most in the world. I swallowed hard. "No, Mom. If my kids aren't welcome, then I'm not coming either." A long silence stretched between us. Then Mom exhaled sharply, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Suit yourself," she said, and just like that, she hung up. I stood there, staring at the phone, my breath shaky. I could hear my kids in the next room, giggling as they built a pillow fort, blissfully unaware that their beloved grandparents had just dismissed them as if they were a burden. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I had spent my entire life trying to please my parents, seeking their approval. But at what cost? If I allowed them to get away with this, if I attended that dinner while my children sat at home wondering why they weren't good enough, what kind of mother would I be? No, I wasn't going to do this anymore. They had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine, and they would regret it sooner than they realized. The weight of my mother's words lingered long after the call ended. I stood in my kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My phone remained clutched in my hand, my fingers trembling as I set it down. My heart raced with a mix of anger and sadness. I had always known my parents favored Ryan, but I had convinced myself it wasn't as bad as it appeared, that deep down, they loved all of us equally. But tonight, they had shattered that illusion. They didn't even attempt to hide it anymore. They loved his children more. A sudden laugh, bright and carefree, rang out from the living room. I turned to see Mia and Ethan still playing in their pillow fort, completely oblivious to the rejection that had just occurred. My chest tightened. They deserved so much better. I squared my shoulders and walked into the living room, forcing a smile. "All right, you two," I said, my voice more composed than I felt. "Who's ready for movie night?" Ethan's eyes lit up. Can we watch the one with the talking dog? I scooped him into my arms, planting a kiss on his soft curls. Absolutely, buddy. But as we settled onto the couch, the anger simmering inside me refused to fade. I had spent years trying to fit into my parents' world, adhering to their expectations, hoping that if I just did everything right, they would finally see me as equal to Ryan. But it had never been enough, and I was done trying. The next morning, I woke to a text from my brother, Ryan. Mom said you're being difficult about Thanksgiving. Why do you always have to make everything so dramatic? I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Of course, she had already gone to him. Me, so she told you she uninvited my kids but invited yours? The typing bubbles appeared, then paused. A minute passed before he finally replied. Ryan, she just wants a calm dinner, Julia. You know how your kids can be a lot. A lot. As if they were a burden. As if they were something to be endured rather than cherished. Something inside me snapped. Enjoy your perfect Thanksgiving, Ryan. I won't be there. I switched off my phone before he could respond. They didn't want me or my children at their table. Fine. I wouldn't be part of their world at all, and they were about to discover what that truly meant. For years, I had been the dependable one, the one who always stepped in when they needed help. When my parents needed someone to pick up groceries, they called me. When their Wi-Fi went down, I was the one who drove over to fix it. When they wanted assistance organizing a family gathering, I was the one making calls and running errands. And Ryan, he got to be the golden child, doing the bare minimum while reaping all the benefits. But if I wasn't part of their favored family, then they wouldn't be able to rely on me anymore. A week before Thanksgiving, my mother called again. I considered ignoring it but ultimately decided to answer. Hello. Julia, she said, her tone cautious. I just wanted to check in. I know you were upset, but I really hope you'll reconsider. We would love to have you and Mark there. Not you and the kids, just you and Mark. I took a deep breath. I meant what I said, Mom. If my kids aren't welcome, then neither am I. She sighed heavily, as if I were wearing her out. I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn. It's just one night. You know how much Ryan's boys mean to us. And there it was, the final, painful confirmation that my children, the two little beings I loved more than anything, would never be enough for her. I clenched my jaw. You've made it clear where we stand, Mom. I won't bother you again. Julia, don't be like this, she began, but I ended the call before she could finish. This time I didn't cry. I started small. When my dad called that weekend to ask for help setting up his new TV, I let the call go to voicemail. When my mom texted to see if I could pick up her prescription, I left it unread. For years, I had been at their beck and call, always available, always dependable, but not anymore. It didn't take long for them to notice. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, I had missed a total of 12 calls and ignored 6 texts. Then, on Thanksgiving morning, I received a message from Ryan. Mom and Dad are really upset that you're ignoring them. Are you seriously going to let this go this far? It already went too far when they told me my kids weren't welcome. This time he didn't respond. I silenced my phone and focused on my real family. Mia and Ethan were at the table, helping Mark mix pancake batter. They were covered in flour, laughing uncontrollably. This was our Thanksgiving, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. But little did I know, my parents weren't finished yet, and their next move would be something I'd never forgive. Thanksgiving morning was serene in a way I hadn't experienced in years. There was no rushing to get the kids dressed in their best outfits, no stress over preparing the perfect side dish, no anxious glances at the clock to ensure we weren't late. Instead, we were in our own little bubble, our home filled with laughter. The aroma of pancakes and maple syrup wafted through the air. Mia and Ethan took turns stirring the batter, while Mark flipped the pancakes with exaggerated flair, making them giggle every time he nearly dropped one. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again, and then again. Mark shot me a concerned look. Do you want me to turn it off? I hesitated, then shook my head. No, if it's an emergency, I should at least know. I swiped to answer, keeping my voice even. What is it, Mom? Oh, now you decide to pick up, she huffed. I suppose you're just sitting at home feeling sorry for yourself while we're all here enjoying a lovely dinner. I sighed. Mom, if you called to gloat, I really don't have time for that. That's not why I called. Her tone shifted to sharp. I need to ask you something. I pinched the bridge of my nose. What now? Did you cancel the credit card? The room suddenly felt very still. I turned away from Mark and lowered my voice. What are you talking about? Your father's credit card, the one we've been using for groceries, gas, essential things. It was declined this morning. A slow, icy realization crept up my spine. The credit card she was referring to wasn't theirs, it was mine. Years ago, when Dad was recovering from surgery and money was tight, I had added them as authorized users on my account temporarily, just to help them through a rough patch. I had intended to remove them once they got back on their feet, but life got busy, and I had forgotten. And they had never reminded me. I clenched my jaw. You mean my credit card? A pause. Then Mom scoffed. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Julia. It's just a card. You make good money, and we figured. My voice trembled now. That you'd just keep using my money, and I wouldn't notice? Oh, don't act like this is some grand betrayal, she interrupted. We raised you. The least you could do is support us now. I inhaled sharply. Are you serious? After telling me my kids weren't good enough to come to Thanksgiving, you still expect me to keep paying for your groceries? Are you even listening to yourself? Mom let out a long, dramatic sigh. You know what, Julia? This is exactly why we don't like having difficult conversations with you. You always overreact. Overreact. I was done. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I did cancel the card. And since we're being honest now, let me make something very clear. You won't see another cent from me ever. Mom gasped, as if I had slapped her. Julia, don't be ridiculous. I cut her off. And while we're at it, don't expect Christmas gifts, birthday gifts, or anything else either. You made your choice when you told me my kids weren't welcome, and now I'm making mine. Silence. Then, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard from her, she said, You'll regret this, and hung up. For a moment, I just stood there, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. Slowly, I turned back toward the kitchen. Mark was watching me closely. Everything okay? I forced a small smile. Yeah, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Just taking out the trash. He didn't ask any more questions. We spent the rest of the day enjoying our own Thanksgiving, watching movies, baking cookies, and playing board games. For the first time in years, there was no underlying stress, no need to walk on eggshells, no pressure to be someone I wasn't. But as peaceful as it was, something told me this wasn't over, and I was right. My parents weren't just going to let their golden source of money slip away. Their next move would reveal exactly what kind of people they truly were. The silence from my parents didn't last long. 3 days after Thanksgiving, my phone lit up with an incoming call, Ryan. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I exhaled sharply and answered. What do you want? What the hell, Julia? He snapped, skipping any pleasantries. Mom just called me in tears, saying you cut them off. What is wrong with you? I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Did she also mention that they've been using my credit card for years without my knowledge? A pause. Well, she said you were helping them out. Helping them out? I let out a humorless laugh. They've racked up thousands of dollars on my account without asking, all while treating my kids like garbage. But sure, let's pretend I'm the villain here. He sighed, clearly trying to manage his frustration. Look, I understand that you're upset, but cutting them off completely, that's extreme. You mean the way they completely excluded my children from Thanksgiving? They just wanted a peaceful evening, Julia. Mom said your kids can be a little wild. My grip on the phone tightened. Oh, I see. So they can use my money, but my kids aren't good enough for their table? Got it. He groaned. You're twisting this. No, Ryan. I'm finally seeing it for what it is. There was a long pause. Then his voice turned calculating. Look, maybe we can work something out. What if you just kept helping them but set limits, like a smaller monthly transfer? That way, no one has to suffer over a misunderstanding. A cold laugh bubbled up in my throat. Let me get this straight. You want me to keep sending them money after they literally told me they love your kids more than mine? They didn't mean it like that, he grumbled. They said it, Ryan. He had no response for that. After a moment, his voice turned stiff. Fine. If you want to be selfish, that's on you. But don't expect Mom and Dad to forgive you anytime soon. I smirked, shaking my head. I'll survive. Then, before he could argue further, I hung up. For the next few weeks, my parents played the silent treatment game. No calls, no texts. I figured they were hoping I'd cave, come crawling back, begging for their approval, like I always had. But what they didn't realize was that for the first time in my life, I didn't need it anymore. And just when I thought they'd finally given up, they pulled one last desperate stunt. It was the week before Christmas when the letter arrived. Mark found it in the mailbox, his brow furrowing as he read the sender's name. It's from your parents. I stiffened. Oh great. Let me guess. Guilt, manipulation, or straight-up gaslighting. He smirked. Why don't we find out? I took the envelope, my stomach twisting as I tore it open. Inside was a formal legal document. My breath caught as I read the words. They were demanding reimbursement for years of emotional and financial support. I let out a disbelieving laugh. You've got to be kidding me. Mark took the letter, scanning it quickly. They're saying you owe them for raising you and for all the financial sacrifices they made for your well-being. He looked up, his jaw tightening. Are they actually trying to bill you for your own childhood? Apparently, they were. They had even included itemized costs, things like food, clothes, school supplies, and medical expenses from my childhood. And at the bottom of the page, a final sum, $78,542. I blinked. They seriously thought I was going to hand over nearly 80 grand. Mark scoffed. They must be desperate. I exhaled slowly, anger coursing through me. This wasn't about money. This was about control, a final desperate attempt to pull me back into their grasp. I looked at Mark, my mind already made up. I think it's time I pay them a little visit. The next day, I drove to my parents' house, gripping the letter tightly in my hands. I knocked, and when Mom opened the door, her expression immediately hardened. Oh, so now you show up? I didn't take the bait. I held up the letter. You seriously thought this would work? She crossed her arms. It's what's fair. I let out a sharp laugh. Fair? You want to charge me for being your child while expecting free money from me for the rest of your lives? Dad appeared in the doorway, his expression smug. We sacrificed a lot for you, Julia, and now you're abandoning us. I stared at them, shaking my head. No, Dad. You abandoned me when you made it clear that my kids weren't good enough, when you lied and stole from me, when you put a price tag on my worth. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. If you don't want to pay, then I guess we'll have to involve lawyers. I met her gaze unfazed. Go ahead. She blinked. What? I crossed my arms. Take me to court. Try to explain to a judge why you're suing your own daughter for expenses from 20 years ago. Let's see how that goes. Silence fell. For the first time, they looked uncertain. Dad cleared his throat. We just thought you'd want to make things right. I laughed. Oh, I am making things right now. I ripped the letter in half, watching their eyes widen. I'm done being your personal ATM. Mom gasped. You ungrateful little. I turned on my heel. Merry Christmas. I called over my shoulder as I strode back to my car, and for the first time in my life, I felt lighter. As I drove away, I realized something. They weren't upset about the money. They were upset because, for the first time ever, I held all the power and I wasn't giving it back. I thought that after tearing up their ridiculous demand for money, my parents would finally back off. That maybe, just maybe, they would sit in the wreckage of their own arrogance and realize they had pushed me too far. But people like them, they don't change. They just escalate. It started small, a text from Mom 2 days before Christmas. Mom, Julia, this is ridiculous. We're family. You don't turn your back on family over a silly argument. I ignored it. The next day, another message. Mom, we forgive you. Come to Christmas dinner, and we'll forget this ever happened. I almost laughed. They forgive me? Then, a few hours later, one from Ryan. Ryan, they're really hurting Julia. Just apologize so we can move on. I rolled my eyes. Of course, in his world, I was the one who had done something wrong. I typed out a response. Me, funny. They weren't hurting when they were stealing from me or when they told me my kids weren't welcome. I think they'll survive. I hit send and blocked his number. Then Christmas Eve arrived. Mark and I had just put the finishing touches on the tree, and Mia and Ethan were in their pajamas, dancing around the living room, too excited to sleep. It was perfect. And then the doorbell rang. Mark and I exchanged a look. "No way," he muttered. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. Sure enough, it was Mom and Dad. I considered ignoring them, but then I spotted what they were holding, a giant, beautifully wrapped box. I sighed and opened the door. "What do you want?" Mom's face lit up with forced cheerfulness. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." Dad held out the gift for the kids. I folded my arms. "No thanks." Mom's smile faltered. "Julia, don't be stubborn. Let's not ruin Christmas over this." "You already ruined Christmas," I shot back. "When you told me my children weren't good enough for your table, remember that?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Dad sighed. "Come on, Julia. Let's just be a family again." I stared at them, feeling nothing but exhaustion. "You don't want to be a family," I said quietly. "You want me to go back to being useful." Their silence spoke volumes. I shook my head. "Take your gift and go." Mom's expression hardened. "Julia, don't be selfish. Think about the children." I smiled coldly. "I am thinking about the children. That's exactly why you're not in their lives anymore." Dad's jaw tightened. "You really want to do this?" I exhaled. "I already did." And with that, I shut the door in their faces. That night, we had the best Christmas ever. Mia and Ethan tore into their presents, their laughter echoing through the house. We drank hot cocoa, played board games, and watched Christmas movies until they fell asleep on the couch. For the first time in my life, Christmas wasn't about trying to prove myself. It was about us, real family, chosen family. The kind that doesn't come with conditions, the kind that doesn't make you earn love, the kind that loves you because they want to, not because they expect something in return. I thought that was the end of it, that after being cut off financially, humiliated at Christmas, and rejected at my front door, my parents would finally accept that I was done. But I underestimated just how much control they thought they still had over me. Because on New Year's Eve, they did something I never saw coming. New Year's Eve was supposed to be a fresh start, a night to leave the past behind and step into a better future. That's what I told myself as I set up the snack table, laughter and music filling our home. Mia and Ethan were buzzing with excitement, running around in their little party hats, counting down the hours until midnight. Mark was pouring champagne for us, a soft smile on his face. It was our night, our celebration. And then the knock. I froze, my stomach twisting. Mark glanced at me. "You think?" I already knew. I walked to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it. And there they were, Mom, Dad, Ryan, and Ryan's wife, Chloe. It was an ambush. I crossed my arms. "What do you want?" Mom smiled, but it was the same forced, sugary tone she always used when she wanted something. "We just want to talk." "No thanks," I replied flatly. Dad sighed. "Julie, enough. You've made your point. Now let's fix this before things go too far." I narrowed my eyes. "Too far? What does that even mean?" Mom exchanged a glance with Ryan. "We just don't want this to affect the kids." Something about her tone made my skin crawl. "What are you talking about?" Ryan stepped forward, arms crossed over his chest as if he were the one who had been wronged. "Mom and Dad have been talking to a lawyer." A cold wave of dread washed over me. "A lawyer?" I repeated slowly. Mom nodded, her eyes gleaming with false sympathy. "We're just worried, Julia. You've cut your children off from their real family over a silly misunderstanding. That's not fair to them." I felt my pulse quicken. "What are you trying to say?" Dad cleared his throat. "We've been looking into grandparents' rights." For a moment, all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Then I laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was loud, unhinged, and sharp. They thought they could legally force their way back into my life, into my kids' lives. Ryan's face twisted. "What's so funny?" I wiped my eyes. "Oh, you're serious? You think any judge is going to look at this situation and side with you?" Mom's lips pressed together. We've done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. I repeated, stepping forward. You stole from me. You treated my kids like second-class citizens. And now, because I finally cut you off, you think you can bully your way back in. Dad's face darkened. You don't want to do this, Julia. I met his glare with a smile. Oh, but I do. I pulled out my phone and held it up. I want you to think very carefully about what you're about to do, I said, my voice icy. Because I have every text, every voicemail, every demand for money. And I promise you, if you try this, I will bury you. Chloe gasped. Julia, come on. No, I snapped, my eyes locked on my parents. You have no case. You know it. I know it. And if you keep pushing me, I will make sure that everyone you know sees exactly who you really are. A beat of silence. Then Mom's face twisted in anger. You're being unreasonable. I smiled. No, Mom. I'm finally being smart. I stepped back into my house and grabbed the door. Happy New Year, I said sweetly, then slammed the door in their faces. They never followed through with their pathetic legal threat. They knew they had nothing. They knew they had lost. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from them. Not a text, not a call, nothing. And for the first time in my life, it felt like freedom. The weight of their expectations was gone. The pressure to please them was gone. The endless cycle of guilt and manipulation was gone. Months later, on a sunny spring afternoon, I sat on the porch, watching Mia and Ethan chase bubbles in the yard. Mark handed me a lemonade and sat beside me. It's been quiet. I nodded. Yeah. Feels good. He smirked. Think they'll ever try again? I sipped my drink, watching my kids giggle as they popped the bubbles. Doesn't matter. Because I've already won. I have my kids, my real family, and I'll never let anyone make them feel unwanted again.